Thank you for having me. It's an honor, as I'm an imposter here because I don't belong to UCLA. I asked that question when they invited me to speak. But something very interesting happened this morning. A bear was sighted in Princeton campus. So I think that they're trying to give us a sign. It's very interesting because it's reunion and graduation week, and literally there was a black bear, not a brown bear, in the campus today in the morning. So, and I have good collaborations with UCLA. The plan for today is to touch research on 4 different areas that explain very different type of directions where machine learning and computer vision can produce technology that can make, or it is already making, a big impact to health. And I'm going to be concentrated on these 4 examples from my research team, but it's going to be very clear basically the opportunities for translation. Some of them are already licensed or being licensed, and some are already in the field. So I'm going to start with the first example of machine learning to solve a fundamental problem today in health and society, and that is for autism screening and diagnosis. The numbers I show you on the screen are the official CDC numbers, so these are not numbers I invented for this presentation. About 3% of the population in the United States is in the autism spectrum disorder, so 1 every 31. And basically, the screening and diagnosis is very non-uniform in the United States, as you can see from that map, also obtained from the CDC. And one of the reasons for that is lack of access. So I'm going to explain in a second why. Just for those that are very financially oriented, 3%, so basically there is about 4 million babies born in the United States every year. So you can start thinking about the number that basically are in the autism spectrum disorder and deserve a proper screening and diagnosis. This becomes even more challenging outside of the United States. For example, in sub-Saharan Africa, there is about 500 million children and only 50 specialists in the field to basically not only screen and diagnose, but also to do intervention for these children. Why is screening and diagnosis so hard? Because what needs to be done, so there's no blood test, there's no brain test. What needs to be done is a behavioral observation that takes a few hours, and it needs a specialist. That's called the ADOS. That is the official thing for diagnosis. And it's very, very time consuming. And the result of that is that a condition that can be diagnosed between 18 months and 24 months by a good doctor, it's actually the average of diagnosis in the United States is close to 5 years. During those 3 years, as most of you probably know, is actually some of our best years for learning. And the intervention during those 3 years have been shown to be extremely impactful with an average of 17 points increase in IQ, and also changes on brain connectivity. So it's a true result. And so there is no way to scale this with just more doctors. This is where machine learning, computer vision, and technology shows up. So with my close colleague, Jerry Dawson, and an extremely large team, and I should have the picture of everybody here, but it's one of those examples that to bring technology really into the clinic and the homes of people, we had to put a team that I have never experienced in my 40 years in academia, where we have clinicians, iOS developers, experts in policy, and even ethics professors involved on what is the ethics of doing this work. And we developed a really fun app that takes about 10 minutes, and it runs on the pediatric clinic or at home. I'm going to just briefly show you results in a second. So it's about the kids are playing with games and watching movies for about 10 minutes. I'm going to show you one of the movies. It will look extremely boring to you, but it has good reasons to exist, and it's extremely exciting for children. And that is the type of approach that we're doing. So we're basically...
Ready?
All videos are like this.
Go!
There is a reason for this video. The main reason is every video is to elicitate behavior on the children. Are they paying attention to the person? Are they paying attention to the toy? Are they following a conversation? What are they doing with the bubbles? And all what we use, and there are other companies out there that they use extra hardware, all what we use is this tiny device that should be in your pockets, not on the table. You shouldn't be looking at it because I'm speaking. But basically, everybody has one of these devices in their pocket, and that's all what we need. About 10 years ago, we say, that's all what we need. It was an intellectual challenge, and we actually made it work. So this is just one child basically looking at the video. We do facial analysis, gaze analysis, emotion, head tracking. We do a lot of computer vision and machine learning. And we develop an entire system that basically parents or pediatricians download the app just with a QR code, run this for 10 minutes. The data goes automatically either into health systems, or we actually have a system now that goes into the cloud, into AWS, and gets automatically analyzed and then gets a report. The report might go to the parents, might go to the clinicians, but gets full automatic process. 10 minutes of playing of watching the movies and playing, there is a bubble popping game, and then just in a minute, they will get the report. A few years back, I did a calculation. This will cost about $1 of AWS computer. And it can also be done on the phone. We decided to do it on the cloud. Happy to discuss why. But so basically for $1, you can screen and potentially diagnose. We actually run this in South Africa. We screen about 60 kids in 1 hour. And just all what we had to do was just ship some phones. I'm not going to bore you with the results. We did this in the clinic. We did this at home. We did it mostly for 16 to 30 months, but also for preschool children. And the performance is as good as an average clinicians doing this. So maybe it's not as good, so don't believe a lot on what you hear about superintelligence. This is not about superintelligence. This is about access. This is about semi-intelligence that a good ADOS clinician will have, but just doing it on device. And we are at that level of performance today. So basically, this is completely scalable. I'm happy to discuss. We just finished the clinical study that we are about to analyze the data. We already had pre-submissions with the FDA. Big process, over $30 million funding from NIH. So I just giving you the end of the story after like 12 years of work. But this is what happens in academia. You work for a long time until things start to work, and we need to be patient. And I'm going to share more about that in a second. Let me just move to something completely different. So that was about screening, potentially diagnosis of a clinical condition. The next one is about mostly well-being and passive. So not an active event, but just passive. And it's basically looking at wearables, and can wearables tell anything about how your body is aging? The most important number in your body today is your age. So that is the most, if you were to pick one number that helps in almost every diagnosis, is age. And so that, and also most policies for health are based on age, on your chronological age. When do you get a colonoscopy? When do you get a mammography? When do you get a cardio calcium imaging? It's all based on age. What is actually interesting is not your chronological age, but it's actually how is your body aging. We all know people that are 80, they look like 60. We know people that are 40, they look like 60. And we want to try to understand that. If you have never looked at your biological age, I strongly recommend. It's kind of fun. It costs about $500. I'm not involved, but there are companies that they send you a kit, you get some blood, you ship the blood, they send you a 100 pages report that nobody understands, but Jem and I can explain it for you. And for that, it will tell you a lot of things about how your biology is aging. We wanted to do something else. We wanted to go again with devices that everybody has, in this case, a watch. Every wearable device, I'm wearing a watch and I'm wearing an Oura ring, have a number of sensors. All of them have those sensors: PPG, IMU, heat for temperature. But one of the most important is the PPG. I just do a diagram there. If you have never seen, is that light that my wife tells me, what is that red light coming out from your ring in the middle of the night? That is the PPG. It's kind of scary if you don't know it, because she thought my finger was magic because it was a red light coming out of it. So you're sending light and you're measuring the return of that light, and that gives you tons of information about your body. If you look at the release last September of Apple, hypertension detection is based on PPG. Heart rate, based on PPG. AirPods on the ear, heart rate, based on PPG. So it's a very important signal, and we ask ourselves, can we use it to save something about your health? It turns out yes, and these are just some of the results. We just published a paper in Science about 2 years ago, and the basic idea is that we did a lot of machine learning to this continuous PPG signal, and I'm skipping the slides on the machine learning, but there's tons of machine learning, and then we try to use that to basically associate with different clinical conditions. And let me just give you a couple of samples of examples of results from there. We have tens of pages in the paper, and I'm happy. By the way, I'm around, so I'm happy to talk more. So this is just a sample. First thing, PPG, once again, is this light that is shine into your body. By the way, if you're ever in the hospital and they put a clip on your finger, that's PPG, okay? Now, there is a difference. That PPG is transmission, so it transmits the light on one side of the finger, it returns on the other side. Or a ring watch is transmission and reception, so it's just bouncing. But it's the same concept. So from that signal, for healthy people, and that's because of the machine learning we did, we can predict their chronological age with an error of 2.5, which is actually equal or better than DNA and blood tests, way better than we do by recognizing faces. So if they give me an hour, we could just play here, recognize the age of your neighbors, and you're going to be way, way more error. Humans, our faces are about 7 years old. We make an error of about 7 years. So we are very good. If the person is from the general population, not necessarily healthy, the error on predicting their chronological age is a bit over 3. And then we say, oh, what happened here? I'm having an error in predicting your chronological age. Maybe that error has a signal. So if I thought that you were healthy, I will predict your age correctly, but you are not predicting it right. So for those of you that are machine learning experts, this goes against almost everything that you have learned from machine learning. This is a work which is enjoying machine learning making a mistake. But that mistake, we find that is associated with a lot of biology. It's not just a random mistake. So let me just give you a basic couple of examples. So this is diabetes female. And let's just concentrate on the pictures on the right. The red are people that their biological age is 6 years above their chronological age, according to the PPG signal. And blue is the people that is about 6 years below. And what I'm showing on the right is actually the prevalence, in this case, diabetes female, we did tons of different conditions. So the prevalence, according to the CDC, just population prevalence, that's the one horizontal line, okay? That is what dictates policy today, okay? But what we see is that people that actually are aging much worse, they have a prevalence of 2.5 or 3 times more of diabetes. So if you are 45, but you look like 52, according to the PPG, the clinical system should treat you like a 52 years old or even older. It turns out that biological aging is worse than chronological aging. So a 45 that looks 50 is actually normally in worse health than a 50 that looks 50. On the other hand, the blue lines, the people that are aging very, very healthy, you don't need to run the same test. That's a complete waste because the prevalence is extremely low. So this is just one example of how to measure your biology. No invasive, no $500 for a DNA test. Again, it's a lot of fun. I do it almost every 6 months just to see, because it's kind of fun to play doctor for a day, take blood from my finger and stuff like that. And literally, I had to upload the documents to Gemini to explain them to me, because they are very medical. This is another way of seeing this. This is cardiac conditions. This is what we like in the statistics community, survival curves, is how long do we expect for this event to happen. Everybody here that is around my age, above certain threshold, I'm sure you do a cardiovascular score every year with your blood panel. If you don't, then you should. So basically, you enter your age, your BMI, your gender, your cholesterol, and it gives you a risk of, hey, in the next 10 years, you have a 7% chance of having a heart attack or something like this. Those are survival curves. And I'm showing you here, the higher the better. It takes longer to get to that bad event, okay? And it's all probability. So look, for example, age 55 with an age gap of 6. These are people that look older, 6 years or more. That's the red line. So it's 55, they look around 60 or more. On the other hand, look at 65, the dotted blue, that look 60. So they look the same, but one came from above, the other came from below. The dotted line is much higher. So basically, we can detect from this device that your cardiovascular risk is actually way better represented than what your chronological age will say. And for those of you that are really, really into statistics, then you have basically the hazard ratio. The higher the better, and you're going to see that this is better than cholesterol. I didn't mention to you before that cholesterol is on the standard American Heart Association cardiovascular risk score. This is better than cholesterol, and I don't have to go to the doctor to get a blood test. I don't want to embarrass anybody, but every time I ask, most people say, I don't do an annual blood test. But most of you, I hope, are wearing a wearable in your wrist. Let me just finish this part. Again, very different. This is completely passive. You're not doing anything, but let me just finish with something fun. It turns out pregnancy increases your biological age by about 3 years on average. This has been demonstrated both by us and by DNA. This is just a pure association, because I can also show you that lack of sleep, lack of exercise, change of nutrition, we report all of them changing your biological age, and all of those happen during pregnancy. So it's not clear that it's the pregnancy, but the behavioral changes that are happening. So that's an example of using passive wearables to try to understand your health. I'm going to finish with 2 more examples. One is using wearables to encourage you to do something good for your health. And one example is the Apple Watch has basically, it's known, before I say what the Apple Watch, if you've been sitting for 50 minutes, so basically at 10:50, everybody that has an Apple Watch and doesn't turn that off will be encouraged to stand up and move for a minute. And that has been shown in the literature actually works. Even just 1 minute, it already works. So if you just move your body for a minute between meetings or in a conference, it actually works. And we ask ourselves, is this standing nudge basically helping people? So asking people to stand up after 50 minutes, it helps or not. It turns out, and we published a couple of years ago, it turns out that yes, it helps a lot. And we use tools from causal inference and machine learning to prove that for certain demographics, it actually makes them stand about 3 times more than they would do otherwise. And I wanted to share this because we often, and I know that I was just told that tomorrow is a lot about therapeutics, so it's going to be many more people. This is therapeutic, but with no drugs, with no nothing, and we show that it works. And there is plenty of literature showing that this small standing actually helps. The other thing that a close clinical friend of mine told me that helps a lot is to open the doors every hour as well to change there in the room. So I'm encouraging the organizers to do that. They say it's really, we spend a long day in our office, particularly on calls where we speak, and it turns out that we should also nudge people to do that. So we have seen 3 examples. One is basically an active 10 minutes fun game to try to do screening and diagnosis. The other is to understand your body, and this is kind of to encourage you to do healthy activities. I'm going to finish with something that I worked many years ago, and I think is the first FDA-approved machine learning brain intervention. We got FDA probably about 15 years ago. And this is deep brain stimulation. For those that are not familiar, basically they put an electrode inside your brain and activate, and is used a lot for Parkinson's, ataxia, and there are humanitarian reasons also for depression and OCD. What turns out, and you might not know, and I don't know if there's any neurosurgeon or neurologist in the room, what you might not know is that the standard way that this surgery is done is based on coordinates, so they need to know where to put the electrode. The standard way of where to put the electrode is based on coordinates that were learned from histology of 2 nice French ladies that donated the brain to science. And everybody targets, let's say, the subthalamic nuclei based on the coordinates of these 2 very nice French ladies. I can promise you that my brain has nothing to do with their brain. They were way smarter than me, so clearly I have a different brain. We developed a machine learning tool to use data from the hospital to basically compute very accurate targeting. The reason that you need this is because the standard MRIs do not see the target. So they need an atlas. They need a GPS to do that. Completely different technology, happy to discuss more. This is serious. So I went from, hey, not just to stand, to just drilling your brain and putting an electrode, but this got FDA approval. To my surprise, because of the very high accuracy, we got FDA approval for this with about 70 patients. And the FDA was super happy. We got it it was a 510K, less than 120 days, and it was approved. So, this is just examples, but I was told that I have to potentially give you some view from the academic perspective. I've been in academia for a long time about translating technology to industry. So let me just give you a few points about that to conclude, and then happy to discuss more about that. First of all, the world is changing. Literally takes you less than an hour. If you know Claude for programming, you can just now in the next break program an app that will take your entire electronic health records, your entire watch aura, integrate and give you something. Less than an hour, you will do that. And I know because my students have done it. They know how to do Claude for programming, and they did it. They connected their electronic health records to that. So the world is changing. There is new FDA regulations. I don't have to inform you that came out in January. We need to understand them. There is also tremendous partnerships which are important. And I just want to stress one case that basically shows partnership. A few years ago, there was a Lancet Hearing Aid Committee. I might be mispronouncing. Blake Wilson, a close colleague of mine, was the leader. That they actually push for hearing aids to be basically off the shelf, no prescription needed. They convince leadership, FDA, everybody, that we should move hearing aids from prescription-based, $3,500 or so, to off the shelf, that you can go and buy them in the corner. And they did the study, they convinced, so there is this nonprofit organization that basically work with the government, they convince, and then this small company called Apple say, wow, that's a great opportunity, and made these guys hearing aids, okay? So those partnerships are awesome. because that's, again, goes to scalability. One of the things that all of you have more experience than me, and I'm going to finish in 5 seconds because that's going to blow. All of you have more experience than me on startups, but I often get knocked my office door by undergrads that want to do a startup. And I always ask them, first of all, define who is your client. Is the consumer? So wearables are a good example for that. Is the doctor? They have no time, 0 time. Anything you do that will increase by 30 seconds their day, they will not adopt. Everything you do that will help them to go golfing sooner during the day, they will adopt. That's life. That's life. Is the hospital? Be aware, hospitals sometimes care more about dollars than patients because it's a business. It is insurance. They're definitely, sorry if there is any insurance person here, they definitely, outcomes is irrelevant for them. Okay, so you need to understand who is your client before you jump into that. And then health is slow. Everything is slow. They knock my door and they say, oh, wow, this startup just started 6 months ago and Meta bought them for $3 billion. Very difficult in health. You're not going to go to $3 billion in 6 months. Or, I mean, you might, but it's very, very seldom. Why? I think it's a lot of fun. Those of us that have been in academia for a long time, I think at some moment, and I hope there's some academic in the room, at some moment, we need to move from papers to making a contribution to the humanity. And many years ago, a very smart person, Rob Califf, that used to be the commissioner of the FDA, when he saw our work in autism, he looked at me and said, you're going to see that you're going to have to move to the next step. It's not about, we publish the work in autism in the New England Journal of Medicine, in Nature Medicine. Those are the top journals. You want to do something else, you have to jump. Either work for a big company, work for a small company, license your technology. At some point, it's about making contributions to humanity and not just writing papers. That's my personal view. But thank you very much, and I'm sorry I took 1 more minute or so.